Hey guys, Ips here coming in with another video, and I wanted to take the time to talk to you guys about the 7.1.5 PTR build that they currently have released, the most recent iteration. The reason I wanted to kind of talk about it is a lot of warlocks were talking about it on the forums, a lot of warlocks have been complaining and things like that, and I wanted to give you guys my take on it and what I think about the changes. Just a quick brief explanation before I go into the thing. I think that the changes for Affliction were good. I think the changes for Demonology were okay, and I think the changes for Destro are good but don't make sense, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. So, with regards to the direct changes that they have on the spell things, the first one that comes to mind is Empowered Life Tap. So, it's not only the first one there, but it's also the first thing that comes to mind. Just because it doesn't make sense why they would put an ability in the game like this. It doesn't make sense why they would put an ability like Empowered Life Tap into the talent tree because it's just better than Contagion. Flat out, it's just a better talent. It does the same amount of damage increase for longer, and it can pandemic, and it doesn't require you to have UA on the target. You can just always have it up, and it gives you mana back. It's just, way better. I'm not sure how good it's going to be for Destro and for Demonology. It'll probably be pretty good for Demonology as well if they do have it, but I do know for Affliction Warlocks, this is definitely going to be the go-to single target Warlock talent to take, which I think is kind of silly. I think they should buff Contagion back to 15% if they're getting a talent like this in, just to make them more competitive, because right now the way that it's looking is you're going to run Empowered Life Tap for single target and Absolute Corruption for everything else. Not a great change, I don't think, but, I can't complain. It's going to be a single target damage buff significantly, so it is what it is. The next change is just, reverse entropy. It just changes the wording on it to make it so Rain of Fire isn't there anymore, which makes sense because Rain of Fire is instant anyways, so, whatever. Just a passive change. And quickly, before I go over the PvP talents, I want to go over the regular talent calculator. So those were the two new talents that they have here on the spell changes, although there were a lot of changes on the talent calculator that aren't listed there. So, just to talk about Affliction really quickly, the theme that I wanted to go into Affliction before I started talking about the talents was, what was Affliction doing bad on right now? Affliction was doing poorly on priority target swapping to targets that would live, 15 to 20 seconds long. Affliction was doing poorly on that. So, for example, of a current fight in World of Warcraft, Il'gynoth, when the Corruptor Tentacles spawn, they only last a few seconds. Warlocks are basically useless at doing damage to those because what are you going to do? Put a few dots on them? By the time you put your dots on them and they start ticking for damage, they're just dead anyways. So that's basically what Affliction was doing poorly on. They were doing decent on single target, and it's going to become better. And they were doing well on having a decent amount of targets to cleave that were alive for a long time. Like on a fight like Odin, obviously they were performing very, very well. So let's keep that in mind when we talk about the talent changes. So the first one I want to talk about is Malefic Grasp. Now Malefic Grasp, what it does is instead of now channeling your Drain Soul or Drain Life on the target, they changed it so you always have Drain Soul now. So whenever channeling Drain Soul, your dots will deal 20% increased damage to the target. This basically speaks to me as a build for someone who doesn't want to run Soul Effigy. They want to run an ability like Soul Conduit, and they want to focus on keeping their dots up on the target and then buffing them with Malefic Grasp. They really like this mechanic. I think that it's an okay mechanic. I don't necessarily think it's good to have an ability in the game that's, designed around all your damage is a filler spell, which is Drain Soul. It requires you to stand still and channel, which is kind of an annoyance. Obviously, you can take the time to find and sit down. UA, reap UA, get 5 UAs on the target, and then cast Drain Soul. You're going to be doing a ton of damage. But I don't think that's really interesting gameplay. I think it's a cool talent. I think, maybe you'll use it on a single target encounter with Soul Conduit if you don't want to use Soul Effigy. I think it'll be good in that scenario, but again, you have to find the time to Drain Soul. You have to find the time to stand there and channel this thing when you're doing damage. Otherwise, obviously, it's just a worthless talent, right? So I think it's going to be good in this situation where you can plant your feet and channel that 20% increased damage on the target with your UAs and things like that. I think it will be decent enough, but do I think it will take over a Writhe and Agony Soul Effigy single target, spec? No, I don't. Do I think it will be a good alternative for people who don't want to run Soul Effigy? Yes, I do. So that's kind of where I am at with Malefic Grasp as a talent right now. The next talent that I really want to highlight, and I think is a great addition for the game, is going to be the Haunt change. So what Haunt does is, it's a ghostly soul that haunts the target, dealing damage, and it increases your damage dealt to the target by 10% for 15 seconds. So imagine you're on Il'gynoth. And imagine Corruptor Tentacle spawn. Now imagine you're able to haunt one of those corruptor tentacles, dump 3 UAs into it, it dies, it gives you a haunt back, it gives you a shard back, and now you can target the next one, haunt it, and dump 3 UAs into it, and it dies, and you get it back again. So basically, you can already kind of see where I'm getting at with this talent. It's really good for medium target priority switching. It's really good in the sense that you can use this on a target, it will die, you'll get the refund back. You're also not only getting the refund back, it's also going to be decent enough for single target because it increases your shadow damage by 10%, so they're buffing that as well. But you're able to priority switch by using haunt and UAs and using the refund mechanics that they have in order to do that priority damage. Rather than Agony takes forever to ramp up. You're never going to get a 20 stack on a mob that's only living for 20 seconds. It's just not going to happen. So basically what they're saying is, okay, that's not going to happen, but we can give you this ability where you can get all this front loaded damage on the target, and it won't be, a huge loss for single target. You're still going to be able to do decent single target damage, but you're also going to be able to have the option to do priority damage switches with a build like Haunt. So I think that's a good change that they made. I think it's a nice talent. I think I'm going to pick it up definitely on some fights where these ads are going to be spawning. I'm going to be wanting to do more damage to them if they only live a short period of time. Definitely going to be abusing this ability. I think it's super cool. I think it's going to be really fun to play around with. I really like the change that they made to Haunt. The next change that I wanted to talk about was the Soul Harvest change. I think the Soul Harvest change is a good one. 5% increased duration is huge. It's like a 50% buff. It went from 10 to 15 seconds. And the max duration was also increased. So on a fight where you can, dot 4 or 5 things, and Siphon Life doesn't have any value because if you're dotting 4 or 5 things, then you can't keep Siphon Life on all of them because it's too many globals if you also want to be casting UA, and Seed of Corruption won't be value because, say, these 5 mobs are spread out or something like that. Soul Harvest is going to be the best talent to take because you're going to be generating that increased damage with a big duration. Say there's 5 mobs out, 5 times 2 is 10 seconds. You're going to have a 25-second Soul Harvest where you're dealing just 20% increased damage. You can, stack that with your UAs. Really, really cool talent. Really, really like that they buffed the duration on it. I think it might see some play in the Nighthold, but we'll have to see. It's basically going to be like on maybe like a 3-target council fight. It could be good. On a 4-target council fight, if those even exist, it would be good. So just keep a lookout for this ability. I think it might see some play, and I think the change to it, the buff to it, definitely makes it competitive with an ability like Siphon Life, which doesn't do too much DPS as is. So those are the Affliction Warlock changes, basically just giving you some more tools, some more options to use for some multi-target spreading. So, I like it. Some decent changes. They recognize what Affliction was bad at. They gave us an ability to kind of say, hey, if you're bad at this and you want to be better at target switching, here's Haunt. So that's kind of nice of them to do. The next changes I want to talk about are the Destruction Warlock changes. So the main thing, I guess, that they changed about Destruction Warlock was they moved Eradication with Cataclysm. And the reason they did this is very clear. Reverse Entropy and Eradication are 2 things that buff single target. Cataclysm and Fire and Brimstone are 2 things that buff AoE. Okay? Yes, Eradication buffs Cleave as well. Reverse Entropy buffs Cleave as well. They were saying Warlock is overperforming in Cleave, and Warlock is, so we're going to move Eradication to Reverse Entropy, but not only that, we want to make it so they have to choose which talents they're taking, because basically everybody was taking Reverse Entropy and Eradication. They want to say, okay, if you want to play single target, you're going to have to choose between these 3 abilities. If you want to play AoE, you're going to have to choose between these 2 abilities, right? So we're going to put them on the same tree. That makes sense, right? If you want to play single target, you're going to have to make a choice. If you want to play AoE, you're going to have to make a choice. That makes sense. What doesn't make sense is Destro already sucks at single target. It's already so bad at single target. I mean, I say it's so bad, and there's some warlocks, that do crazy damage as destruction single target, but that's with all the legendaries and things like that. Overall, Destro, obviously, compared to the other classes, underperforms single target. So why would they make this change without also buffing Destro single target? It just doesn't make sense to me. I think we're probably going to see some number tuning changes with regards to these changes, especially if Destro is super underperforming single target, because it just doesn't make a sense that this spec is so good at Cleave, and it's going to be decent at AoE now. I mean, Destro isn't great at mass AoE, but it's okay. It doesn't make sense why they would make these changes and not buff Destro single target. I don't see why, but we'll have to see what Blizzard has in the future patch notes and stuff like that. The other change that they've made were just to general Doomfire, just to make it a slightly better talent on AoE, because basically what's going to happen is you're going to launch these Fell Bolts, and they're going to explode when they hit the target for half the amount of damage that they dealt to the original target. So it's kind of cool. It might be an option you take on single target. I still think the ability is kind of clunky. I'm not sure if it will be a great ability to run or anything like that. If you want to read it, it's here. It's just okay. It's like a whatever. I think people are still just going to be taking Soul Conduit and Wreak Havoc, but maybe they'll take Channel Doomfire now. I don't know. I think Soul Conduit and Wreak Havoc are still going to be the better options. Obviously, with these changes, Destro will still be great at Cleave and will still be decent at AoE, but their single target just got nerfed into, I don't even, you can say nerfed into the ground. It was already pretty bad as it was. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the Shadowburn change, and I just don't understand why Blizzard just doesn't bite the bullet and make this ability baseline. There's absolutely no reason why in this current iteration that it is right now, why it couldn't be baseline. It's a 12-second cooldown, it generates a soul shard if the target dies within 5 seconds, and it just blasts it for moderate damage. Why not just make this ability baseline? Why not just have this ability only use it when the target is below 20% health and just have it baseline? There's absolutely no reason for it not to be. Maybe if they want to buff Destro single target, just give them, an ability like Shadowburn, which doesn't work on Havoc, and just does a lot of damage every 12 seconds or something like that. I don't know. I don't know why they don't just make this ability baseline and make it slightly more useful. I just don't understand. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense why it's in the talent tree. No one's going to take it except if you're leveling. It just doesn't appeal to me whatsoever as an ability for Destro Warlock. So yeah, those are the Destro Warlock changes. I think that Destro definitely needs some single target 11 come 7.1.5 is my take on the changes. Finally, going to Demonology Warlock, I think the changes to Demonology Warlock are okay. The reason I think that they're okay is, let's think, what does Demonology Warlock struggle with right now? Movement. What are they good at? Standing still and doing single target damage. Okay, knowing that, let's go into the talents that they've changed. Impending Doom. Doom deals damage 3 seconds faster and summons 1 wild imp when it deals damage. Okay. Power Trip. Went up from 50% to 65% and generates 1 soul shard when used in combat. Obviously, this means that you can't just spam Power Trip outside of combat and get a bunch of shards before the boss fight pulls. So, basically what these changes means is if you want on a fight with a lot of movement, what you can do is you can run Impending Doom and you can run Power Trip. And what this does is it frees up a lot of movement globals because you're going to be casting Doom so much more often. You don't have the auto reapplication from Hand of Doom. You are able to get a lot more benefit out of casting Doom because it's ticking 3 seconds faster and it summons a wild imp when it deals damage. I think those are good changes. It's a minor improvement to Demonology Warlock movement, which is what they definitely needed. And I think that this is the right way to go about doing it. Don't go about doing it by making it so you have cast while moving abilities. Go about doing it while making it so you have talent choices where your playstyle changes a little bit and you just have more instant casts based on the spec. I think this is pretty cool. It's also worth noting that Impending Doom is very, very good for multi-target just because Doom is such a high portion of your damage, not only making it tick faster, but also summoning a wild imp will make it very, very valuable. So I think those are two changes that are really, really good for Demonology Warlock. Now let's talk about the nerf. The nerf was to Demon Bolt. Basically, they said, we're going to nerf Demon Bolt to take 2% off of each minion you have out. So roughly a 20% nerf on your Doom Bolts when they're at max capacity. Now this seems like a big nerf, but it's not going to be huge. It's maybe going to be like a 8 to 10k DPS loss on a single target fight, like pure single target. I think it's an 8 to 10k DPS loss, which isn't massive. But I think that with Nighthold coming out and the 2-piece where your demons were going to last a little bit longer and you're just going to be able to pump out more demons is the reason for it, because they don't want Demon Bolt scaling to just crazy numbers for you able to get too many demons out. So I think it's not a horrible change. All it really does is nerf Demonology standstill DPS because you have to be standing still and channeling a lot of Demon Bolts in order for it to do a considerable amount of damage, because not only do you need to stand there and cast for it to do damage, it also has the additional effect that you need to have a lot of demons out for it to do significant damage. So it's just a slight nerf to the talent. I don't think it's going to change anything. I think Destro Warlock or Demon Warlocks are still going to be picking this talent for single target and even sometimes for AoE. So just a small nerf to the talent. I don't think it's a horrible thing. I think it's fine. I think the changes to Impending Doom and Power Trip are really good. I think maybe you could have left Demon Bolt alone, but the slight nerf to it does make sense because Demon Warlock was doing fairly well single target, and they all are also nerfing a lot of the other classes that have been doing exceptionally well at single target. So these are the changes I want to talk about with talents. I think there were some decent choices for Demonology, some good choices for Affliction, some poor choices for Destro. The reason the Destro choices were poor were not necessarily because they didn't make sense, but more so because we didn't see any numbers being buffed reflected in the patch notes as well. So, having talked about all of these talent changes, I want to go on to the PvP talent changes. So, if you guys want to learn about the PvP talent changes, you can listen in now. So, the first thing that's here is basically cremation. Immolate is now an instant cast. Your incinerate also automatically apply. Oh, sorry, immolate is no longer an instant cast, but now your incinerate automatically applies immolate. So basically, the change that they said here was you're no longer just going to be able to spam Shadow Burn and Immolate as instant cast as your entire DPS rotation. You're going to have to now cast something to get those Immolates out. So it could still be fun in a battleground to say run Fire and Brimstone and spam Incinerate and auto apply Immolate to everyone. That could be really fun to do. But basically, what they're saying is you can no longer just instant Immolate and spam Conflagrate and Shadow Burn someone to death, which I think is fine. I don't think it's necessarily a fun playstyle. You just only cast instant casts to kill somebody. Some people might find it enjoyable, but I guarantee you people that are fighting against you do not find it enjoyable. So I think this is a nice change because people usually aren't going to kick you on Incinerate anyways. It only takes a second to cast, and it just removes the need to Immolate. You just cast Incinerate instead, and basically just makes Immolate hit harder on the initial application. Kind of cool. The next change is Curse of Shadows, and this is for Affliction Warlocks, and what it does is magical damage or effects will now strike the target for an additional 50% of their shadow damage every time that they tick. I think this is good. I think this is good because it sees synergy with any other dot class, like Assassination Rogues, or sorry, Subtlety Rogues, they do have a magic dot. Shadow Priests, things like that, you can use it in conjunction with them, and basically you can just say, okay, if we can CC the healer, and they're not able to remove our dots, and no one has a decurse, we can just crush this guy for 10 seconds. We put him to a full fear, and our dots are just going to be crushing him. So I think this is a really good talent. I think it's a talent that is only going to be used in very specific situations, which I think is fine, but as long as it does see some use, I think it is a good talent. So yeah, I think it's kind of cool. Make your dots hit harder over 10 seconds. Basically gives Affliction Warlocks an ability to say, hey, I'm no longer a Rot You class. I'm going to kill you in these 10 seconds class, which is kind of fun. It'd be fun to play with that. The next change was 1/2 Death's Embrace, and basically what this talent did before was when the target was at 100% health, it made your dots hit harder. Now, when your targets are lower, it increases the damage that the dots do. So this is kind of nice. This basically means that when the entire team is below 30% or someone is below 30%, they're going to be taking 100% increased damage from you. That is a big number. 100% is a lot, like that's twice the number. That's twice as much. Obviously, Affliction Warlock single target damage isn't great, so when that target does get into that execute phase, you'll just be doing more damage. I can see this talent being really good for running a comp like RLS, for running a comp like WLS, things like that, where one target is consistently getting low, but not everyone is always rotting because warriors and rogues don't have super rot pressure. But I think this talent will lose value when running something like Shadowplay, because generally when you're running a rot cleave and the entire enemy team is already below 30%, you basically won the game at that point anyway. So this would just be a win more mechanic. I think it's good as a finisher when running something like WLS or RLS. So I think it's a cool ability. I think it might see some play, and yeah, I'm just glad things like this are in the game. The next change is to Essence Drain. So instead of being 10%, it's now dealing 5% reduced damage every single time your Drain Life ticks, stacking up to 5 times. I think this is a good change, and the reason I think this is a good change is because I don't think it's really fair just to make someone do half damage just because you're channeling an ability on them. I don't think that's a good game design. I think it was a little too overpowered at 50%. I think 25% is much more reasonable. It'll still be a good talent to pick up doing 1v1s and things like that, and will still be a good 2v2 talent. It currently saw no play in 3v3, so that's fine. But in 2v2 now, it will be balanced, and in 1v1 it will be balanced. Before, it was just a little bit too much. 50% damage reduction was huge. 25% is more reasonable. It's still, going to be significant to try to keep this up on the target that is attacking you, but it just won't be as big of a deal to the targets that's attacking you because, 25% is a lot less than 50%, but it is still significant. A good change. I thought it was too overpowered in its original iteration. I think it's much more balanced now. Fellfisher. Chaos Bolt creates a 5-yard wide eruption of Fellfire under the target, dealing shadow damage every 1 second, so the shadow damage every 1 second was removed, and instead it reduces the target movement by 50%. I think this is a buff, because basically what it's saying is the shadow damage doesn't really matter anymore. The only thing that matters is people can't get out of this fissure because they're being slowed at a 50% reduction. So I think that's a good change. I think basically the only thing that mattered about this talent to begin with was reducing all healing received by 50%. That's pretty significant. 50% healing reduction is a lot. And it basically makes it harder for the target to move out of it. So I think that was a buff relative to the dealing damage part of it. I think it's pretty good. Yeah, just a nice quality of life change for it. Just makes it into a slow as well. Firestone restores 2 soul shards and increases spell critical strike chance by 70% or by 100% for 7 seconds. And the cooldown was basically just reduced by 20 seconds on this ability. Good change. I think Firestone was an okay talent. I just think it was not competitive relative to the other ones once the Chaos Bolt damage got implemented. But now that this ability has had its cooldown reduced by 30 seconds, that's very significant. I think it'll see a lot of play. I think it'll be a really good talent to pick up. I think it'll be a lot of fun to run with. You can basically pop this and spam some Chaos Bolts for some crazy numbers. It gives you two shards, so it just automatically generates you that ramp, and you're just going to be crushing people. I think it's going to be a really fun ability to play with. So Rotten Decay got nerfed. I think the nerf that was made was it's not going to refresh your dots as quickly as it is currently. I'm not entirely sure. Basically, before it just refreshed the duration on the target, and now it refreshes it by 1 second for every time it ticks. I'm not sure how much it will refresh relative to before. I think it will be less, slightly less, so maybe it will be harder to maintain, which I don't think is a bad thing, because right now I think it's a little overpowered in 2v2 Arena, where you can just, maintain all your dots on everybody really easily with Rotten Decay, and especially in dampening it becomes super powerful. But at the same time, it doesn't really see that much play in 3v3 Arena because it's clunky and people can just kick you. So I'm a little bit iffy on this change. I think it's okay, but I don't think it was necessarily needed to be nerfed. Whatever. It's a whatever change for me. It's like, okay, it's slightly nerfed. It'll still be good in the situations where it's good. It'll still be bad in the situations where it's bad, but it wasn't really crazy overpowered in the situation where it was good anyway, so why would you nerf it? Maybe just make it more competitive with the other talents in the tree. Soul Shatter. So basically what this ability does is it consumes your damage over time effects on the nearest 5 enemies within 40 yards, and then deals 10% of their total shadow damage in, so basically deals 10% of their health and shadow damage. So I don't think this is that good, because basically what happens is you explode all your dots, you gain 10% haste for each, explosion, each target that was hit by Soul Shatter, and for 8 seconds. So basically in a 3v3 arena situation, in an ideal situation, you'll be generating, how much is this? 30% haste for 8 seconds. It's not that crazy. And you'll basically be doing 30% of the entire enemy's team life, so 900k damage. So, I mean, consuming all of your shadow damage effects, basically what you could do is you could just put, I think you'll just put, an agony and then just shatter it for a lot of damage. Basically, 10% will be about, 250k on every target, and just generate 30% haste. So that's kind of cool. You'll generate a lot. It'll just be a good mechanic to generate shards. I think it'll be good in RBGs, but with regards to Arena, I think it's a little bit too clunky. 60-second cooldown is kind of long for only a 30-second haste, like a 8-second haste buff for 30%. It's basically like a Bloodlust, which is not really that good for only 8 seconds. Yeah, I don't see this talent seeing a whole lot of play. I can see it maybe used in cheese comps, but in any of the traditional Warlock comps, I don't think it's that good. So, these are my comments on the PvP talents. This is my review for Warlocks. Some good changes, some bad changes. What can you expect? It'll be interesting to see what the final iteration is. I hope you guys liked this video. I hope you guys, appreciated some insight that I had on this. If you disagreed, let me know. If you agreed, let me know. Yeah, just some alright changes. I think Affliction had some nice ones. I think Destros were questionable, and I think Demos were fine. So, yeah, that's my opinion on the builds for Warlock. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys.